This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics. We promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. In this episode, we have Rajesh Janakiraman, Engineering Manager at Gmail Android at Google. Rajesh, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and share more about my experiences building these apps for billions of users.
Cool. Thank you for coming. This is great. All right. Before we're going to start, let me set the stage. One of the things that set mobile apps apart from desktop software is the scale. From 2008, when the mobile app stores were launched and on, scale has been a crucial ingredient for any iOS or Android app project success. For both Apple's and Google's app ecosystems to grow, mobile apps had to be affordable for lots of people. But for app developers and brands to make app enterprises profitable, they had to acquire a big number of users. And there's more. In some cases, when we talk about a free app from one of the most influential companies on the planet, Gmail app, we're talking about roughly 1.8 billion users. This scale implies some unique challenges we're going to be discussing with Rajesh today. But first, let's kick off with talking about you, Rajesh. Please tell us about yourself and your background in tech.
Of course, yeah. So I currently manage an engineering team on Gmail Android. So I've been at Google for about 6 months now, so fairly recent. And for those who are not aware, which I'm not sure is a lot of people, but Gmail is the largest email service in the world with, like you said, over 1 billion active users. It is completely free, and it was first launched, I believe, in 2004, which is almost 20 years ago now. And prior to Google, I was at Meta, formerly called Facebook, for over 8 years. And while there, my focus was all things Android on the Facebook app. So I've built authentication libraries, security systems, animation libraries, design systems, and everything in between. And in the period that I was at Facebook, I got to see the Facebook ecosystem go from a little over 1 billion users to several billion. I think around the time I left, it was almost 3 billion users. So yeah, I got to see multiple apps that are thriving in the billions of users ecosystem.
Yeah, so we're running out of billions at this point for these apps. We need more people from other planets to join. And yeah, I like probably folks who were born on Mars, they haven't heard about Gmail by now. But for any people who are from this planet, they should be at least aware of the app, or if not using it on a daily basis.
Yep.
What was it like to switch from being Gmail user to become an engineer manager at Gmail Android? Was it like, finally, I can fix this and do that?
Yeah, so I ever since Gmail became fully open to public, I think right around 2007, because there was a brief period where it was like invite only. I've almost like grown up alongside Gmail, where a lot of my initial use cases to it were back then smartphones hadn't taken off all that much. So it was a lot of like communication with friends and family through email. And Google had a product called Google Talk, I believe, which was like an instant messaging service right in Gmail. And so I would communicate a lot with friends and family through email, through Google Talk. I don't know if this was like just me, but it was also one of the first like large online storage available. I think they were giving out like 1 gigabyte, which was a lot of storage. So I would find myself just like emailing myself attachments for things that I wanted to keep secure when I didn't trust USB drives. So that was like early use cases. But more recently, while a lot of our communication has transferred to more real-time apps like WhatsApp and Messenger and FaceTime, I think Gmail still continues to be an incredibly valuable product for life management for me. Like a lot of my online accounts are managed on Gmail. I still use it heavily for communication with colleagues, acquaintances, like when I'm setting up discussions with people I've never met. And I'd say that the sort of like common thread in the 2 decades that it's been around is just trust. Because like if you want to use it for life management particularly, you have to be able to trust that your data is safe. You have to be able to trust that you're going to get the emails that you have to get, and you have to trust that when financial institutions or banks send you information, that that data is secure and that nothing is going to happen to your data. And having a product maintain that reputation for so long is a very difficult thing to do. And so when I went from being a Gmail consumer to like an engineering manager on the product, I think that was the most striking thing for me, which is like looking at the underlying technology and like what made it so robust, and what made it continue to hold that reputation of stability, consistency, reliability for such a long period of time. You get to see artifacts because of the age of the product. You get to see artifacts of the technology as it has evolved over time. Like both pluses and minuses. Like I said, you get to see what has made it such a sustainable product over such a long time. But you also get to see all of the tech debt that it has accumulated from decades of evolving technology, like different people working on it. So it's a mixed bag, and it's very exciting to see how the product has evolved over time. And you also get to see, which you've never had visibility to before, the breadth of users for the product. Because like you sort of see like really obscure use cases. You were like, oh, I didn't know people would use Gmail for that specific use case, but here we are. And then if that use case is large enough, that becomes something that you have to consistently support.
Yeah, should on your map.
Yeah, and like you constantly have to make these trade-offs of like, is this the direction that we want the product to go in, even though there's a lot of users that are using it for this specific purpose. So yeah, you get a lot of visibility into like technology, users, and it's a very thrilling experience.
You're saying a lot of artifacts from previous versions, and it reminds me the other big project on this planet, Human Genome. For people who are really into genetics, they do see a lot of artifacts from previous generations of the species we came from. So Gmail is kind of on the scale of the system of that complexity. So there's no way you can at some point say, okay, guys, we're going to be redoing the whole thing from scratch. The world cannot just stop and wait for you guys to spend a few years to build a new app from ground up. Exactly. You have to iterate on what was done before.
Yeah,
and yeah. So Gmail is I used like 10 years ago. I used to remember then in my work environment, a lot of conversations were going like, okay, we're going to be solving this thing on email. And it always meant working out something on Gmail. So before Slack, people were just trying to kind of mimic today's chatting on Slack in Gmail, sending short messages back and forth. And so at some point, they will have entire project being developed there. And this is the work environment. I'm trying to think what about the current generation, Gen Z, because we're older obviously than Gen Z. As far as I can see right now, it looks like these folks will be joining the army of people using Gmail or email clients. Most likely Gmail, I think, when they start working. So email is not relevant for them right now. So they're living in the world of Snap, WhatsApp, and mail is not there yet. Yeah. But once they start working, every job and their related work, and they're getting tons of notifications if they're using photos. A lot of kind of supportive tasks are still going through email, and obviously it's more like to a very robust, quick, and almost feels like the instant messaging experience right now, because things are getting so fast. I think we kind of forgot the moment when we were, I guess, splitting the experience between, again, this is a desktop app, this is the application built on the web. The line, the borders kind of blurred out over the years by now, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of like the more direct communication has transitioned to like the apps that you were talking about. But when it comes to email, it still is the primary form of communication when we want to discuss, like large forms of communication that people want to be able to track. And particularly work conversations that doesn't have to be directly online, that we want to like maintain some version of so that we can reference back. I think hasn't yet caught up to be like a sustainable form of communication that people can use for more formal discussions. And that's where I think email shines the most.
Right. So you may end up in a few years down the road, you may end up in a situation when you need to recover something that was said or exchanged with somebody in the past, and Gmail is like a repository of all this information. Because recently I was looking for my email from 10 years ago, looking up for the information specific to some service to see if I can find any traces of the password I was setting up back then, which I just completely forgot about. But you can still dig up those details from there. It's still sitting there and it's safe, which is really important. Now let's switch on the challenges of building something from, quarter of a world's population. Like this scale, as you're saying, implies many situations when regularly when you have when you're on a lower scale, you can think of any way more, like the repertoire of purposes is way bigger than the for regular app, right?
Yep. Yeah, I've seen this sort of breadth both at Facebook and at working on Gmail. And so I mentioned the breadth of users briefly, right? And it's such a massive set of users that you see this like whole spectrum of how they use the product. For example, just from a pure device perspective, you see the latest $1,500 Samsung device running the latest version of Android with hundreds of GB of storage, where it's not going to matter how much space you take up on their phone, with multi-core processors, where it's not going to matter how efficient your app is, all the way to the $10 no-name smartphone that has a few megabytes of storage, that has barely enough space for them to use WhatsApp and Gmail and store their contacts. And it has very basic processors that make it very hard for the app to run. And there's more users on that $10 smartphone than there are on the $1,500 smartphone. So how do you provide an experience that is consistent, predictable, and reliable, even under those sort of conditions? Like the $10 smartphone that I mentioned, a lot of like the emerging countries, they're not using the Samsungs. They're using like your Oppos and your Vivos and your Micromaxes, which are very basic phones. And so it is very important when you're operating at the scale to have to think about how do you create the best experience on those low-end devices with the resources that you have.
Yeah, this is like you may not be thinking about it when you're in the midst of your task and your workflow, but you're democratizing the platform from folks of all walks of life, with different income, different like as different as it can can be different cultures that they live in. And for some people, smartphone can be the only device they're using. They don't just bother to buy a PC or a laptop. They're just trying to, pour as much money as they have to the single smartphone, buying so-called phablets, or their monthly income so low, so they only afford this very cheap smartphone. But yet you're providing them the platform to be connected with other folks who are living in the kind of a different world. And yeah, this is one of the things that never crossed my mind, because you only maybe get a glimpse of it when you're buying for somebody your relatively cheaper phone. All of a sudden you can see, boy, this thing does not support the apps I would need to have, like WhatsApp or other messenger. So what would be my communication channel with this device? So yeah, Gmail can be that bridge between all these different parts of culture, different level of incomes and whatever. This is like the single point of like the connecting bridge between these people.
Yeah, exactly. And so because of that, you have to spend a lot of time not just optimizing the performance of your app, but considering all of these different scenarios where you have to operate under very minimal resourcing conditions. Like storage, CPU. You'll encounter obscure bugs that happen on a very old version of Android because that person hasn't updated their phone in so long. You'll encounter users who have not updated their apps in years because they don't know to go to the Play Store and like update their app. So you see a wide spectrum of like users, and let's say as a very quick example, like let's say a user who's on a very old version of Android is crashing. You now have to like be able to go back and figure out like what's going on with the app on this like really old version of Android. So yeah, a range of challenges that deal with the spectrum all across the ecosystem.
Anything on the team management wise, like people you're working with to solve these problems? You're not just alone trying to, single-handed to wrestle all these problems. You're on top of the team of folks who are doing this stuff, right?
Yep. Yeah. So there's actually an interesting anecdote from when I was at Facebook. Internationalization is very important at this scale, right? Because you're serving the entire population of the earth, and you want to make sure the features you're building serve people in their languages and in their context. So we had built this feature which would highlight words in your posts, and then it would play an animation. They're happy words, and so it would play happy animations with like balloons and confetti. And one of the words that would get highlighted is congratulations. Except in Indonesia, the word for congratulations, which was selamat, also means I've survived colloquially. So in 2018, when there was an earthquake in Indonesia, a lot of people were saying selamat and that I've survived, and they were commiserating. And on Facebook, we were playing balloon and confetti animations, which is like
Not
such
really.
a jarring experience, right? And so Facebook actually had to like publicly apologize, and then like it became a whole like PR event for them. But that's why it's so important when you're serving billions of users. You have to be able to understand what like local context is. You can't make these mistakes where like you don't understand the individual context and like you don't understand the individual languages.
Yeah, this is really important to be able to have either people like I don't think it's quite feasible to have people on your staff which can speak like dozens and dozens of different languages, but you have to still be able to be in connection with some local help who can give you that who can basically help you out not to be in a position like you're just describing. And just always remember that cultures are different, different values. Not only the language is different, but I don't know, sense of humor, things they prioritize in life, things how they celebrate holidays may be different.
Yep.
What colors are being associated with happiness and vice versa, because like white and black colors they're famous and not being consistent across the cultures, like which ones are being considered as a happy or sad one. So
Mhm.
this is extremely important when you're creating the graphics, like many things in your app should be relevant and being like on the same page with the local culture.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I think none of the conversations these days can be complete without using talking about generative AI, specifically ChatGPT or its equivalent from you guys, Bard.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about using generative AI in general in Gmail as a tool?
Yeah, I think for those not in the know, like generative AI is essentially using a form of AI to generate content, right? So it could be music, it could be literature, it could be videos, and we've seen it take a significant presence in popular media this last year. And in Gmail specifically, I think Gmail and a bunch of other Google's workspace apps, I think Docs too, released AI-powered writing recently, where like it would help you write emails. And like as a personal anecdote, my parents still use Gmail to communicate with family, and so they write in English, but they've grown up in India, so their English is not perfect. And they would often send me drafts and say like, "Hey, can you polish this up before I
Yeah.
send it to my friend or family?" And so that was like a week long exercise for them because like they're on the other side of the planet and I don't always have time to do it immediately for them. But with something like generative AI, like Gmail just helps them polish the email. And so there are, I think, a lot of applications for the technology in general. And I think this is just a start. I'm really excited to see like what we can do with it in all of our Google products. But there is a flip side to AI too, and that's where we have to be cautious. Google's approach there has been to give control to the user. Ultimately, AI does the suggesting, but the user is the one that decides. They want to send, they want to edit, and that kind of thing. But in the larger ecosystem as well, I think we have to approach generative AI with responsibility. I don't know if you're looking at the Hollywood strike right now with SAG-AFTRA, and one of the issues they're having is that the Hollywood execs want to use AI replicas for free permanently
Yeah.
from the actors, and so you're going to see a lot of these appear where it's going to change how we understand the world around us, and like we're going to have to evolve to deal with it more responsibly.
Yeah, the recent interview of DeepMind, the CEO, comes to mind when he was talking about Google's approach being both bold and responsible, moving forward quick, but still remember about the responsibility that comes with the challenges of that scale. So otherwise, we may encounter a situation later on when a lot of externalities came up, which could be foreseeable, not of them out of your sight. It's just a matter of effort. Do your best to be cautious. This is not to say you can catch up, like you can catch all of them, but at least doing as best as you can to foresee a lot of problems in advance is a really good effort for any software developer at this point. We long passed the time when people were doing, like when we were talking about software, it was about spreadsheets, word processing, benign apps. It's conceivable to think of any global scale problem because of those apps. These days, with generative AI and kind of a chat GPT like apps, this is on a global scale, so you have to be really careful.
Yeah, and the tools like ChatGPT, they've almost democratized access to these systems, right? And
Yeah.
so it'll it'll just increase the ways in which people find utility for generative AI. But that's where we have to be extremely cautious and responsible with like how access to this is opened up to the general public.
Exactly. Now, looking back at your career, which project do you think was the toughest?
Um, that's a good question. I think we built out this animation library for Facebook. I think this was like 5 or 6 years ago, and Facebook Reactions was just being built, and it is now like one of their most critical products because that's how their users provide feedback to posts, provide feedback to like videos and photos and that kind of thing. And leadership was really insistent that it be done with animation. So we went and actually built an animation library that was able to render these reactions. And like it has the same challenges of scale. Like an animation is a very premium experience that it consumes a lot of resources, and like it needs CPU, it needs storage, it needs to be able to render on your screen. And at Facebook scale, like you have to deal with like the very low end phones and like do it well even on those phones as well. So I think that was one of our toughest projects where we had to spend a lot of time just optimizing the animations to not break low end phones and still continue to provide a good experience to them. There is an open source product called Lottie by Airbnb that does a similar thing. But we had to go so much further, just optimizing it on low-end devices to make sure it was performing well. It wasn't like making the overall Facebook experience poor. And I think that was easily one of our toughest projects.
Yeah, I can imagine if you're trying to scratch the compatibility back to very old models of phones and operating systems is always a challenge. There's always this question, okay, at what point we're just going to be dropping, like it's inevitable for Android or iOS at some point, there's got to be this sacrifice. So guys, we cannot support anymore, the versions of like either hardwares or yeah, basically the hardware is always a limitation, how far back you can go. Rajesh, being in mobile tech for more than a decade by now, what would you like to change about it the most?
Change the most. I think phones have stopped being cool. About a decade ago, we used to get like these really cool looking phones, the Nokias and the Sony Ericssons. They were not smartphones, but they were innovative, they were clever. There was a lot of like manufacturing uniqueness to a lot of these phones. But all our phones now are just like one big screen. And I feel like the manufacturers have to experiment more with phones and like come up with more unique phones, which is why I'm a big fan of all the foldables that are coming out. Like Samsung first started like experimenting with the foldable concept, but I think it's very innovative. I think it feels like it's these manufacturers starting to flex their muscle again and not just like put out yet another like full screen device. And so I'm looking forward to what happens in the foldable space, and I want to see more inventiveness in the smartphone arena.
Gotcha. All right. With this question, we're finishing the first part of the show and transitioning to the second one, where I have a chance to ask a few quick questions for every guest on this show, so people who are listening to us have actually good chance to know a little bit more about my guests, not only the topic on the table, but who are these people beyond the topic. All right. I think I know the question, your answer for this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. What smartphone have you been using, and are you on the one side all the time or switching between iOS or Android? Is it Google Pixel?
It is a Google Pixel.
Gotcha.
That's a good guess. But I've been an Android fan for almost a decade now. I've never owned an iPhone. I've always had Android phones.
All right, let's jump back to the past. What was your first mobile phone, the one you can put in your pocket?
Oh wow. I think it was a Nokia. It was one of those brick phones. Maybe like a 6600 or a 6300. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a cool looking phone, and I think it ran Symbian OS. So yeah, a while ago.
Yeah, the Symbian OS doesn't say a lot to people right now, but back in the day, it was the iOS for a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Imagine right now, you just forgot your Google Pixel at home and you're out for some business. What's the most missing feature for you?
I would have to say WhatsApp. I communicate nonstop on it with friends and family, and I would feel handicapped without WhatsApp.
Gotcha. Okay. And the next one will be when you're looking at Google Pixel phone right now, and you may go, wouldn't be great if this thing can do this or that, hardware, software, both things, and not something trendy. Just, from your perspective, what would make a thing more efficient, useful for you?
I think overall more form factors and like more integration into people's lives is the sort of transition I'm looking forward to. In that, how can we move beyond the phone? Like maybe it's like glasses, maybe it's like other forms of like wearable devices. I think that's the sort of next significant shift in technology that I'm looking forward to.
Got you. All right. Before I let you go, very, very final question. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
Oh, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Great. All right, Rajesh. Thank you so much for coming and spending time with us. Thank you.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
Terrific. And that was Rajesh Janakiraman, Engineering Manager at Gmail, Android at Google. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Just remember, we release episodes on Mondays. So subscribe and you will be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.